regardless of your perception of the events on 9/11, it's undeniable that this war on terror is an even more abysmal failure than its pathetic older brother with substance abuse problems. Our occupation of foreign soil and skies does very little to inspire goodwill. We're a fire extinguisher filled with gas at a wildfire, and despite the abundant light, we still can't see why the flames grow stronger. It's time we dropped the Stockholm Syndrome and stop denying that we are debt slaves and disposable pawns for the world's wealthiest people. They own our industries, control our politicians and the military of multiple nations. They love war and the way it consumes resources, secures contract labor, and yields new people and territory to exploit. And, the wars on empathy and humanity, well, they're long over, almost a century ago. And as if the very concepts were casualties of the first shots fired under the guise of making the world safer for democracy. Global distribution of resources is so arbitrarily imbalanced, one could theoretically argue that 13 families share the guilt of every starvation death on the planet today. Then again, maybe you could argue that every one of us is guilty of it too, just for not standing up and saying that we don't consent to it. The notion that one person is entitled to waste more than whole families will ever consume elsewhere, well, that's sociopathic. And the fact is that some of those same wealthy people will graciously fund both sides of any conflict worth the financial investment, because the human casualty, loss of life, isn't a line item on any balance sheet. And sure, they can front you the dough. They'd love to lend a helping hand, because of deficit spending and national debts, and make more efficient slave ships. While the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights have been suffocated, and those who cry out for its resuscitation are targeted as enemy combatants, we even police ourselves from ostracizing the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists on the internet to murdering suspicious kids on Neighborhood Watch. People love to dehumanize the lazy bottom feeders, yet we shuck and jive to our robotic bosses at meaningless jobs and make the true greedy slugs richer while we get poorer, get spread thinner every day, and the wealthy are so insulated that we misdirect our valid bitterness with people we're programmed to think we're better than. Read that stupid poem about choice of attitude in your boss's office again, and swallow it like your SSRIs, so you can go back to your hamster wheel, quickly but calmly. Because choosing your attitude might be all the freedom we have left, except for the freedom of choosing what to buy. But even that's contingent upon having earned the financial freedom to buy something. Let me take this opportunity to say that I do not consent to the status quo. I do not consent to fiat currency or fractional reserve banking, certainly not from a corrupt central bank that threatens pandemonium at the mention of an audit. I do not consent to income tax on personal labor wages, not without representation. I do not consent to the influence of profiteer lobbying or corporate personhood, especially not with limited liability and greater legal obligation to turn profit for the stockholders over anything that's in the people or the planet's best interest publicly. I do not consent to searches and seizures or any unwarranted invasions of privacy. I do not consent to human experimentation, mind control, or any manipulation of free will. I do not consent to illegally wiretap, follow, gang stalk, abuse, indefinitely detain, torture, or drone strike any human anywhere. I do not consent to anything less than equal human rights for all and a culture of sustainable resource management that perpetually ensures optimum harmony with its environment. I do not consent to a level of aggressive government secrecy that makes people scared to question official reports. Because I believe we now live in a world where simply admitting these views aloud can expose one to potential risk. It's critical that I reiterate my position of dissent as one of nonviolence. Although I don't currently consider myself to be a targeted individual, I wonder if my continued efforts to educate myself and exercise my constitutional freedom of speech could one day inspire someone of a different agenda to silence me. With that being said, you should know that I love my family dearly. I love life and art and cherish nature far too much to ever walk away from these things voluntarily. So, if I ever disappeared out of the blue or died unexpectedly or in a freak accident, just pay attention to the details and make sure they add up. It's not crazy to say, though. NDAA authorizes the president, gives him the power to make you disappear for simply being suspected of terrorism. No trial, no lawyers, no call to mom before the waterboarding begins. And it wouldn't be the first time. I wouldn't be the first American killed by a U.S. drone strike. Not the first gringo in a black bag bound for Gitmo. And not even the first to be hunted down on a live TV broadcast that would make Ray Bradbury shiver and cringe, and then torched alive in a cabin by corrupt cops. If you're not going to take it upon yourself to say it, I'm asking you, do you consent